What if everything you were taught to fear was actually the doorway to your power? The serpent, for thousands of years, he has slithered through myth, scripture, and story as a villain, a deceiver, a devil. But what if that was a lie? What if the serpent, instead of being evil, was sacred? What if it was not a symbol of sin, but of awakening? To understand Kundalini, the inner fire, the sacred energy curled at the base of the spine, we must first rewrite the most dangerous myth ever told. And the journey begins in the garden. In the story of Adam and Eve, the serpent is blamed for humanity's fall. It tempts, it deceives, and it opens their eyes. But look again. The serpent tells Eve the truth. You will not die. Your eyes will be opened. And they were. In that moment, humanity tasted self-awareness. They moved from unconscious obedience to the raw, untamed force of knowing. The serpent in the garden was not a liar. It was an initiator. Across cultures, from India to Africa to Mesoamerica, the serpent has always symbolized life force, transformation, and cosmic wisdom. Only in recent religious traditions was it demonized. Why? Because what the serpent offered was dangerous, not to God, but to control. The serpent doesn't ask you to obey. It asks you to awaken. And for systems built on submission, there is no greater threat than that.
Travel now to ancient Kemet, the land we call Egypt. Look at the pharaoh's crown. You will see a cobra rising from the center of the forehead. This is the Uraeus. It was not just royal decoration, it was a sign that the ruler had awakened the serpent energy within. In Kemetian mystery schools, this serpent was not evil, it was divine. It was a fire that moved up the spine, activated the third eye, and turned man into God. The Egyptians knew what many have forgotten, that power doesn't come from outside, it comes from within, from mastering one's own energy. And the serpent was the path. The Uraeus was not metaphor, it was magnetic physiology. It represented the living force of Kundalini, awakened, crowned, controlled. To wear the Uraeus was to become a living Djed, stable, radiant, and aligned. But even this truth would be buried. As monotheistic empires expanded, old symbols had to be destroyed. The serpent, once seen as wise and sacred, became a devil. From the Nagas of India to the rainbow serpents of Aboriginal lore to the feathered Quetzalcoatl of Mesoamerica, all were reframed as tricksters, monsters, or demons. Why? Because those who controlled the narrative understood something deep. You control people best by teaching them to fear their own power. And Kundalini, serpent energy, is power incarnate. It brings visions, it brings healing, it brings rebellion. It connects you directly to Source. No need for a priest, no need for an empire. And so, the serpent had to die.
But symbols cannot truly be killed, only buried, and now they rise again. In yogic philosophy, Kundalini is described as a coiled serpent sleeping at the base of the spine. When awakened, it rises, like a serpent, through the chakras, illuminating each center until it pierces the crown. Sound familiar?
Kemet and India never met through armies, but they met in energy. The Uraeus is Kundalini, the third eye is Ajna, the crown is Sahasrara. Cultures separated by deserts and oceans described the same inner alchemy, a fire that transformed human into divine. And always it took the shape of the serpent, not because of superstition, but because the snake is the perfect symbol. It sheds its skin, transformation. It moves in waves, energy. It coils, potential. It strikes, awakening. The serpent is a symbol not of sin, but of evolution. And when you awaken it, you don't become evil, you become free. The tragedy of the West is not just religious, it is biological. By demonizing the serpent, we demonized the nervous system. We turned away from breath, sensation, body awareness, and entered the mind. We stopped listening to our energy. We were taught to fear too much emotion, too much power, too much presence. But that was the spell.
To keep the body shut, to keep the spine locked, to keep the crown dim. Kundalini was turned into superstition. Energy work was mocked. Serpent symbolism was branded as a cult. Yet still, people awakened. The veterans, the artists, the mothers, the seekers, and every time the serpent rose, not as evil, but as liberation. What if we told a new story, one where Eve was the first initiate, not the first sinner? One where the serpent wasn't a liar, but the very embodiment of life force. One where the throne isn't something you inherit, but awaken within. Kundalini is not Indian, it is not African, it is not Kemetan. It is human. It is the river that runs through every spine. It is the fire that no religion can tame. And now, in this age of remembering, it is rising. Not just in temples, not just in yogis, but in you. Sarah was 42, a social worker. No history of meditation, no religion. One night, after a traumatic breakup, she went into deep breath, sobbing, and suddenly, something broke. She felt a force rise up her back. Her hands trembled, her vision blurred, and her heart exploded with heat. She thought she was dying. But she wasn't. She was awakening.
A deep and clear voice, resonant and solemn, with a hint of nostalgia. A serpent of light moved through her spine. Her body shook for hours. Then came visions, dreams, memories not hers. She thought she was going crazy, but what she was alive. She found a teacher, learned to breathe, learned to anchor, and now she teaches others to not fear the fire. Malik was raised in the church, Southern Baptist, musician, quiet. He never heard of Kundalini, but he always felt something in his back, a pressure, a buzzing. At 28, after a night of chanting with friends, something surged. He saw a blinding white light, collapsed. When he awoke, he was changed, more alive, more sensitive, more clear. He studied ancient texts, discovered the serpent in Kemet, the Uraeus, the Djed, the eye. He realized he had inherited something, not sin, not shame, but royalty. He began making music that healed, that opened others. Now he calls his sound Sonic Serpent, and the people remember. For most of your life, they told you to fear your own power, but you were never meant to fear it. You're meant to remember it. The sleeping serpent within you is not a monster. It is your birthright, and once it rises, nothing will ever be the same again. When you see the image of the serpent on the brow of a king, do not see a symbol of terror. See a signal of awakened fire, a declaration that the mind is no longer asleep. In nearly every depiction of the ancient Egyptian pharaohs, one detail commands attention before all else: a rearing cobra affixed to the center of the brow, eyes unblinking, fangs ready. This is the Uraeus, the royal serpent. But what does it truly mean? In modern times, it's often misunderstood as a symbol of aggression, control, or power over others. But beneath the literal interpretation lies something far more mystical, far more profound. The Uraeus isn't about domination, it's about transformation. The serpent at the forehead is not just a badge of rulership, it is a visual expression of inner alchemy, the awakening of Kundalini, the divine energy at the base of the spine, and its rise up the spine toward the crown. In Egyptian spiritual science, this wasn't abstract theory, it was practiced reality. The throne was not granted merely by birthright, it had to be embodied by consciousness, and the Uraeus was the mark of that embodiment. In Egyptian glyphs and reliefs, the Uraeus is called Iaret, the risen one. It's often seen coupled with the vulture goddess Nekbet, signifying divine balance, serpent and bird, earth and sky, instinct and spirit. But make no mistake, the Uraeus was not mere ornamentation. It represented a specific state of being. To wear the Uraeus was to declare, "I have awakened the sacred fire within. My spine is no longer dormant. My perception is no longer ruled by illusion." Only then, the ancients believed, could one rule with Maat, the principle of cosmic order.
Centuries before the Sanskrit word chakra reached Egypt, the ancient priests already understood the energy centers of the body. The forehead was the seat of inner sight. When the Kundalini, the coiled energy of the base, rose along the Djed pillar, symbolic of the spinal column, it eventually reached the point between the eyes. This was not just poetic mysticism, it was biology wedded with divine experience. The Uraeus, positioned on the forehead, aligned exactly with the location of what we now call the Ajna chakra, the third eye. When the sacred fire reached this point, it activated intuitive vision, inner wisdom, and spiritual sovereignty. In essence, the Uraeus is an external marker of internal realization. The image of the cobra is not passive, it is alive, eyes wide open, mouth poised to strike. Why? Because awakening is not a passive state. When the Kundalini reaches the third eye, it burns away illusion. The Uraeus represents not only seeing, but seeing through veils of conditioning, trauma, programming, and lies. It is fire that sees. The fire doesn't harm the awakened being, it harms only the falsehood. This is why in so many mythologies, the snake is both feared and revered. It is the guardian of sacred knowledge, but also the destroyer of delusion. In Egypt, this dual nature was understood intimately. The Uraeus was both protection and proclamation.
What if the pharaoh was not just a ruler, but a practitioner of spiritual technology? In the mystery schools of Kemet, spiritual elevation was not a metaphor, it was a training, a preparation. The king had to undergo a deep inner journey, rituals of death and rebirth, encounters with their shadow, purification of the body and mind. Only those who passed these initiations were permitted to wear the Uraeus. The symbol was not earned by politics. It was ignited by the awakening of the spinal flame. The Uraeus was the sign of someone who could stand in the fire of truth and not flinch. Someone who had seen the darkness within and transformed it into wisdom. Hieroglyphs describe rituals where the initiate enters a chamber of total darkness. In that silence, they practice breath, vibration, and silence until visions come. In those visions, a snake rises from within, weaving through the spine, touching the brain, then striking outward through the forehead in a burst of light. This was not hallucination, it was gnosis. Modern-day accounts from breathwork, meditation, and Kundalini awakening mirror these exact images. The serpent, the rising heat, the light behind the eyes, the ancients knew it experientially. The Uraeus is not dead mythology. It is a mirror for a living experience. Science is beginning to speak the language the ancients lived. We now know the prefrontal cortex, located just behind the forehead, governs insight, decision-making, and consciousness. When activated through practices like deep meditation, this region lights up and scans like a crown of fire. The ancient Egyptians knew this experientially.
They didn't need an fMRI to prove it. They saw it in their visions. They encoded it in their rituals. They lived the science that modern labs are just beginning to verify. The Uraeus sits exactly where the pineal gland and pituitary gland communicate. These glands, when stimulated through breath and vibration, release natural DMT and catalyze profound inner experiences. To wear the Uraeus was to walk with awakened perception, to enter a room not just with power, but with presence. The pharaoh was not just an emperor. He was a portal between the earthly and divine. And the Uraeus, it was the key that turned that portal open. Today, we no longer wear gold cobras on our heads, but those called to the path still carry the serpent in their minds. When the fire rises and clears the smoke of illusion, it strikes the forehead, not to harm, but to catalyze. We become seers, not prophets in temples, but awakened humans walking the world. The Uraeus isn't ancient history. It's present potential. The serpent still rises, the fire still moves, and the doorway between the eyes is still waiting. Not for kings, not for gurus, but for you. Let the flame find your brow. Let the false burn away. Let the seer awaken. The throne of perception is yours, and the Uraeus is alive.
In nearly every mystical tradition, the spine is more than just a biological structure. It is the pillar, the central axis, the bridge between heaven and earth within the body. In Kemet, what we now call ancient Egypt,
This understanding was encoded into one of its most mysterious and powerful symbols, the Djed. Depicted as a vertical column with horizontal layers, the Djed was often called the spine of Osiris. But to reduce it to mythological ornament would be to miss its deeper resonance. The Djed is a multi-layered symbol. It is architectural. It is biological. It is spiritual. The Djed represents stability, resurrection, and the enduring capacity of life to regenerate itself. But above all, it represents the spine as the axis of awakening, the channel through which a subtle energy akin to Kundalini moves. When aligned and activated, this path brings the initiate into a direct experience of cosmic consciousness. To understand the Djed, one must understand Osiris, the god who was dismembered, scattered, and reassembled. The myth of Osiris is not just a story of death and rebirth, it is a blueprint for inner transformation. Osiris was cut into 14 pieces and spread across the land. Isis, his consort and spiritual counterpart, gathered the parts and resurrected him. The final piece to be restored? The spine. In some tellings, it is through the Djed, the restoration of this axis, that Osiris lives again.
Symbolically, this reflects the fragmentation of the self, the trauma, the forgetting, the scattering of our vital essence, and it is through inner work, breath, focus, energy, that these pieces are regathered. The spine, like the Djed, becomes the channel of resurrection. Each year, during the festival of Hoyak, priests and initiates would perform the ritual of raising the Djed. In ceremonial procession, a massive wooden Djed pillar would be lifted upright in the temple courtyard. This was not merely pageantry, it was a reenactment of cosmic order. To raise the Djed was to stabilize the world. To raise the Djed was to affirm the possibility of inner resurrection. To raise the Djed was to say, though chaos may strike, the spine of life endures. When we view this through the lens of inner alchemy, the act takes on an even deeper meaning. To raise the Djed within oneself is to awaken the latent energy at the base of the spine, guiding it upward through the chakras, or their Kemetic equivalents, until it illuminates the crown. Though ancient Egypt had its own language, symbols, and metaphors, we can draw insightful parallels between the Djed and the chakra system of Eastern traditions. Each segment of the Djed can be seen as a vibrational center, a rung on the ladder of awakening. The base of the Djed correlates to foundational energy, security, survival, grounding. The second layer resonates with creative power and fertility. The third with will, strength, and solar force. The fourth with the heart, balance, and integration. The fifth with voice and truth. The sixth with vision. The top of the Djed aligns with divine consciousness, the merging of human and cosmic awareness.
This upward journey is not abstract, it is felt. When energy moves through a fully aligned spine, it brings not just vitality, but vision. Modern science unknowingly speaks the language of the ancients. The spine is the superhighway of the nervous system. At its core is the spinal cord, and along it runs the vagus nerve, a key to emotional regulation, trauma resolution, and mind-body coherence. When we breathe deeply, when we chant, when we sit in stillness, we stimulate this ancient biological Djed. And just as the ritual pillar was raised to restore harmony, so too does vagus nerve activation restore harmony in the body. This is why the path of the spine was sacred. It wasn't just about bones or posture. It was about coherence, about inner architecture aligning with cosmic pattern. The architecture of temples, such as Abydos and Dendera, mirror the human body. Hallways like nerve channels, pillars like vertebrae, chambers of resonance designed to amplify breath, sound, and intention. Some researchers propose that initiates were led through these temples as symbolic journeys through the body, aligning themselves step by step with the Djed within. The spine wasn't just represented in symbolism, it was embedded in stone, encoded in the very paths the priests walked. Today we live in a time of fragmentation, attention split, spines hunched, nervous systems overwhelmed. To restore the Djed is revolutionary. It means coming back into the body. It means reclaiming the breath. It means remembering that the vertical axis within us is not just physical, it is energetic, ancestral, eternal. Through breathwork, through postures of reverence, through meditative awareness along the spine, we begin to lift the Djed within ourselves. And as we do not just resurrect Osiris, we resurrect the forgotten temples within us. We raise the axis of who we truly are. The Djed was never just a pillar. It was the first antenna, a spinal column tuned to the stars, a declaration that life bends but does not break. And when the energy rises, when the Djed stands tall within us, we remember what the ancients never forgot, that the throne of the divine is built upon the spine of the awakened. What if your body wasn't just biology? What if it was a temple? And within that temple, 7 ancient doors waited to be opened. This is the story of those doors. Not a New Age fantasy, not borrowed from Instagram quotes, but a wisdom tradition stretching back thousands of years, mapped through mystics, seers, and sages from India to Egypt, from Tibet to the heart of Africa. This is the journey through the chakras. And it isn't about colors or crystals. It's about transformation. From survival to sovereignty. From fragmentation to wholeness. Let us walk that path. The word chakra in Sanskrit means wheel or disc. But this wheel isn't mechanical. It's energetic. It spins. It pulses. It governs both your body and your being. There are said to be 7 main chakras aligned along the spine, each linked to physical organs, emotional states, spiritual lessons. But why 7? Why the spine? Because the spine is not just a column of bone. It is the axis of your awakening, the staff of Hermes, the Djed of Egypt, the tree of life. Through it, energy rises, and as it does, it meets gates, blockages, initiations. These are the chakras, not decorations, but thresholds. Located at the base of the spine, This is where the journey begins. Element, earth. Color, red. Archetype, the survivor. This chakra is not about feeling safe. It is about being, about trusting that you belong here, that the earth holds you, that your body is home, not a prison. Trauma lives here, generational fear, scarcity, the wounds of exile. When blocked, you live in anxiety, insecurity, always fleeing or fighting. When opened, you stand, you endure, you remember that your body is sacred soil. Located just below the navel, element, water. Color, orange. Archetype, the creator. Here lives emotion, desire, pleasure, shame. This is the womb of your creativity, the tides of your longing. In ancient Kemet, it was linked to the goddess Hathor, the divine feminine, the nectar of ecstasy. When blocked, you feel numb, disconnected, afraid of your own desires. When awakened, you flow, you create, you remember that life is sensual, not sterile. Located in the belly, just above the navel. Element, fire. Color, yellow. Archetype, the warrior. This is your power center, not power over, but power through. The fire of will, the light of action. In ancient Kemet, this is the seat of Sekhmet, the lioness goddess, ferocious and divine. Blocked, you feel weak, indecisive, ashamed. Awakened, you radiate, you act, you burn away illusions.
Located in the center of the chest, element, air. Color, green. Archetype, the lover. This is the midpoint, the great turning, the place where the lower self and higher self meet. When closed, you protect, you isolate, you perform love but don't feel it. When opened, you grieve, you forgive, you expand. This is not weakness. This is the strength to love after being broken. Here lives Maat, the Egyptian goddess of truth, whose feather weighs your heart, not for sin, but for density. Located at the throat, element, ether. Color, blue. Archetype, the messenger. This is your voice, not just speech, but expression, authenticity. When closed, you lie, you silence, you say what others want to hear. When awakened, you speak your truth, you sing your name, you become your voice. In Kemet, this aligns with the god Thoth, scribe of the gods, keeper of the word. To speak is to create. To name is to birth. Located between the eyebrows, element, light. Color, indigo. Archetype, the visionary. This is your inner sight, the place of intuition, dream, pattern recognition, synchronicity. When closed, you doubt. You follow blindly. You see only what is in front of you. When opened, you perceive. You connect. You remember the larger story. In Kemet, this aligns with the eye of Horus, the awakened eye, the eye that sees beyond illusion. Located at the crown of the head. Element, cosmic energy. Color: violet or white. Archetype: the mystic. This is not an escape from the world. It is the union with it. It is the remembrance that you are not separate, that consciousness is not trapped in your skull, but everywhere. When blocked, you feel isolated, cut off from meaning. When opened, you dissolve, you commune, you become light. In Egypt, this is the realm of Ra, the solar consciousness, the eternal flame. It's tempting to think of the chakras as a video game. Level 1 to 7. Base to crown. But this is not about progress. It is about presence. Each chakra is a realm. Each moment, an invitation. You are not trying to escape your root. You are trying to inhabit it with grace, with wisdom, with fire. Modern spirituality often glamorizes the crown, as if awakening is about leaving your body, floating above, becoming light. But the ancient path always returns to the ground, to the base, to earth. The highest mystics were not those who escaped matter, but those who sanctified it. Awakening is embodiment. The chakras aren't just ideas. They are interfaces, control panels, portals. When you breathe intentionally, when you meditate with focus, when you heal old trauma, you exist in multiple dimensions at once. The magic of the chakras isn't that they exist. It's that you exist through them. Don't see them as ladders. See them as directories, prompts, invitations. You activate dormant centers. You come online. The ancient yogis knew this. The Egyptian priests encoded it in temples. The shamans danced it through rhythm and trance. It was never religion. It was technology. Of the body, of the soul. So many seek temples outside, in the desert, in cathedrals, in sacred sites. But the greatest temple is within, and it has 7 doors, each waiting, not for belief, but for presence. And when you walk through them, you don't become someone else. You become who you always were. The path of transformation doesn't take you away. It brings you home. This is the map, but only you can walk it. And it begins now. There's a side to awakening few speak about. Not the bliss, not the visions, not the harmony, but the burning. The Kundalini traditions of ancient cultures have always warned us. When the serpent rises too quickly or without guidance, it can scorch everything in its path. This is not a fear tactic. It is a truth that any honest seeker eventually encounters. In the West, these symptoms are often misdiagnosed as mental illness or nervous disorders. But to the initiated, they are the cries of the body-soul recalibrating. The problem isn't that the fire is there. The problem is we've built a world without containers for that fire.
One of the cruelest aspects of spiritual awakening is its loneliness, not because no one cares, but because few understand. You may try to share what's happening, only to be met with blank stares or concern. Friends think you're having a breakdown, doctors offer pills, family members urge you to snap out of it. And yet, deep down, you know something real is happening. Not a fantasy, not a breakdown, but a breakthrough. The isolation isn't a punishment. It's a sacred pressure designed to bring you inward, to make you self-source. This is the test of the fire. Will you resist it, or will you let it reforge you? In ancient Kemet, the serpent was not evil, but it was never portrayed as safe either. The Uraeus was the fire of divine awareness, yes, but it required the Djed to rise safely. The Djed, the stable pillar or spine, represented preparation, alignment, grounding. Without the Djed, the serpent burns without a path. Today, in many New Age communities, Kundalini is treated like a buzzword, a promise of bliss, power, or instant manifestation. But the true traditions always included preparation, mental, physical, and emotional cleansing, guidance from elders or experienced mentors, ritual to contain and direct the energy, integration, not just peak experience, but embodiment. The trials come when people bypass these, when they force the serpent to rise through willpower, drugs, or egoic ambition, instead of humility, devotion, and readiness. One of the most terrifying aspects of a full Kundalini rising is the identity dissolution. Suddenly, the identity you thought was you begins to fracture. You don't feel like your old self. Your career, relationships, even your name might feel alien. You weep for no reason. You rage at memories you forgot you had. You feel like you're dying. And in a way, you are. The false self, the survival identity built from trauma, culture, and conditioning, is being incinerated. What emerges is not a better version of your old self. It is a new self, birthed from the ashes of illusion. But first, you have to endure the fire. Each trial of awakening has a hidden gift. The heat teaches you the importance of grounding, of breathing deeply, of slowing down. The emotional swings teach you non-attachment. Feel everything, but believe nothing. The loneliness pushes you to connect with guides, ancestors, or the divine directly. The ego death forces humility. You are not your persona. You are something deeper, vaster, older. The visions show you the symbolic language of your soul, but you must interpret them, not worship them. The body tremors awaken your awareness of the subtle energy system, the rivers of life running through you.
Every pain is a teacher, every fire a forge, but only if you stay present through it. How can one survive, even thrive in the midst of these trials? Here are some practices passed down from both ancient traditions and modern integrative paths. Ground daily. Walk barefoot. Eat grounding foods, roots, grains. Practice slow, embodied movement, Tai Chi, Qigong, Yin Yoga.
Breathe with awareness. Use breath to regulate the nervous system. Inhale, 4 counts. Exhale, 8 counts. Trust the breath to carry you through the fire. Find safe community. Not all will understand, but find a circle, even one person who can witness without judgment. Create. Journal. Paint. Dance. Sculpt. Let the fire move through art, not self-destruction. Study the map. Learn from ancient symbols, Djed serpent, Ankh, lotus, chakra systems. They are blueprints for this very process. Rest deeply. The nervous system is recalibrating. Prioritize sleep, naps, silence. Don't rush. Awakening is not a race. The fire knows its pace. Trust it. So why endure this? Why walk through the fire at all? Because what lies beyond is not just peace, it's clarity. Not just spiritual insight, but a new nervous system, one no longer wired for fear. Not just temporary bliss, but enduring presence, an aliveness that doesn't need constant stimulation. Not just awakening, but integration. When the fire has done its work, you are not who you were. You speak from soul, not ego. You see with inner eyes. You move with purpose, not programming. You become what you were always meant to be. Not burned, but forged. If you are in the fire now, know this. You are not broken. You are being broken open. The trials are not signs of failure. They are signs that you were chosen to wake up in a world asleep. Honor the fire. Walk through it with courage. And on the other side, you will not just find yourself, you will become yourself. You don't return from fire without scars. But the scars are not signs of damage. They're proof you lived. And more importantly, that you changed. In the hero's journey, this is the final stage, the return. But in the Kundalini journey, the return is far more complicated. Because you're not just bringing back treasure from the underworld, you are the treasure. And the world might not recognize your new shape. Let us explore the hardest part of the awakening path, not the fire, not the ecstasy, but the coming back. Emerging from Kundalini awakening can feel like being reborn into a world that is, ironically, still asleep. You've touched dimensions beyond form. You've wept at the unbearable beauty of your own soul. You've seen. But the world around you is still stuck in loops of distraction and fear. This creates a rupture. You don't see the same way anymore. You don't want the same things. Old conversations bore you. Your job might feel meaningless. Your relationships might seem hollow because the you that entered the transformation no longer exists. This is the paradox of return. You bring back truth, but the world prefers lies. And if you're not careful, you might begin to question your own experience. Did I imagine it? Was it just a dream? This is where the real integration begins. The Kundalini process isn't complete without embodiment. To embody means to stabilize the transformation in your daily life, in your body, your choices, your nervous system. Here are 5 foundational practices that ancient traditions and modern science agree on. Breathwork, not as activation, but as regulation. Conscious breathing helps anchor the energy. Somatic movement, yoga, qigong, or dance, to harmonize the nervous system and give the fire a container. Nature immersion. Trees and rivers don't ask who you were. They help you remember who you are. Sacred routine. Waking, eating, resting with intention. Structure is not restriction, it's a ritual. Service, sharing your insights in small, sincere ways, not as a guru, but as a human. These practices help translate the mystical into the practical. Without them, you risk fragmentation and what mystics call spiritual dissociation. Western thought imagines awakening as a linear event. You ascend, and now you're done. But sacred traditions view it as cyclical. Each awakening births a new self, and that new self begins again. The Djed column doesn't rise once. It rises again and again, each time stronger. Integration means learning how to live as the awakened one in the mundane world. To go to work with fire in your spine. To love someone deeply without losing your center. To wash dishes with reverence. To let anger arise and not be consumed by it. In other words, to let the divine energy become human. There is a common myth in spiritual circles that after awakening, all pain disappears. That's a dangerous illusion. Awakening can heal trauma, but it also reveals more subtle layers of pain, collective grief, generational wounds, the suffering of beings you now feel intimately connected to. You become more sensitive, not less. And yet, this sensitivity becomes your strength. The awakened human does not live above pain. They learn to hold it without collapse. This is not transcendence. It is transfiguration. You become the chalice. The pain becomes wine. Families, friends, even spiritual communities may try to return you to the version of you they once knew. You may be called too intense, or accused of losing yourself, or urged to just be normal again. This is not malice, it's fear. People fear what they cannot categorize. Your task is not to convince them. Your task is to remain true without becoming rigid. Soft power, quiet strength, embodied truth. Remember, the serpent doesn't scream. It coils and moves with precision. This final phase is the real test of any awakening. Because fire is easy to ignite. Sustaining it in the winds of everyday life, that's mastery. The world doesn't need more seekers. It needs anchors. People who walk with fire and don't burn others. People who remember who they are, even when surrounded by forgetting. People who can sit at the table of the world and carry stillness into the noise. That is the gift of Kundalini when fully integrated. not just waking up, but staying awake and walking home with the light still in your spine.